Here's some of the most important things you need to know about the classic 1968 science fiction film Planet of the Apes, directed by Franklin J. Schaffner. Planet of the Apes helped to relaunch science fiction film in the U.S. Both horror film and science fiction film had perhaps been a bit out of step with the times in the countercultural 1960s and had not really flourished in that decade. Both of these popular genres, however, saw a resurgence with crucial new works released in 1968. In horror, those works were Rosemary's Baby, which showed that horror film could be genuine cinematic art, and Night of the Living Dead, which showed that horror film could be very entertaining but also very relevant as a commentary on society. In the same way, we had in science fiction film in 1968, 2001, A Space Odyssey, which was a genuine work of science of cinematic art, and Planet of the Apes, which is an extremely entertaining popular film that's also very relevant and comments on a lot of important social issues. Planet of the Apes was not only a big hit when it was first released, but has remained a mainstay of American popular culture ever since. It's one of the best known films in all of American cinema, and even people who've never seen the film probably have a pretty good idea of what it's about and might have seen some scenes from it here and there and might recognize references to it. It generated its own series of direct sequels after its initial release, including a television series as well as several movies. There was also a high-profile remake of the film by Tim Burton in 2001, which wasn't terribly successful. But there was a very successful reboot trilogy of the Planet of the Apes franchise, beginning with Rise of the Planet of the Apes in 2011. So it still fairly recently has been a very successful entry in science fiction film in America. The original Planet of the Apes was a key landmark in filmmaking technology in a lot of different ways. I think probably one of the things that the film is most remembered for is the ape makeup. And when you look at the film, you'll see the apes don't literally look like real apes, but the makeup's very effective at conveying the sense of them being real apes. So it's not as realistic as the computer-enhanced ape effects you can see in the recent films, but it's still very, very effective. Same as you could be said for the set design, which isn't terribly realistic in terms of the architecture and just landscape of the Planet of the Apes. But it, again, very effectively conveys the sense of what the film's trying to convey. So in a lot of different ways, especially technically, this film pointed in some important new directions for science fiction film in terms of being able to produce effects without necessarily having to be totally realistic. First and foremost, Planet of the Apes is a key post-apocalyptic film that comments on the nuclear fears of the Cold War era. It's based on a 1963 novel by French author Pierre Boulle, and it's an important expression of Cold War anxieties that were important all over the world at this time. And that's certainly the central message delivered by the film. On the other hand, it delivers other important satirical messages as well. One of the most important of these has to do with its commentary on racism, which is very effective, I think, because of the cognitive estrangement with which race is treated. Again, I don't want to go into too many details. You can read about this in the following write-up for this film, and you can also, I think, see it when you see the film. But cognitive estrangement in general is extremely important in science fiction, but this, I think, is an especially good example of it in this particular film, where you get to look at everything from a perspective that's very different from the one you're accustomed to seeing. There's also in this film a lot of satire of institutions and of conservative elites and the way that they rule societies. There's commentary on medical experimentation in the film as well. So there's a lot of things going on here. It's also a very 1968 film in the sense that it focuses in important ways on the motif of a generation gap, which was such a hot topic in the 1960s, though it's still an important aspect of society, and I suppose always will be. But the conflict between generations in the ape society of the film particularly mirrors the conflict in American society in the 1960s. The film itself clearly sides with the younger generation, both in its depiction of the ape society and in its indication of what the older generation on Earth did with their power. There's also some commentary on the opposition between science and religion in this film. In particular, in the Ape Society, religious zealotry stands firmly in the way of scientific progress, placing science and religion in direct opposition to each other. And through most of the film, you can see that science occupies the positive role in this opposition, with Zaius and his religious attitudes appearing to be markers of ignorance and superstition that lead to intolerance and cruelty. In this sense, Planet of the Apes is again a very typical science fiction work, and it tends to take a dim view of religion, as science fiction often does, especially if religion impedes the scientific quest for truth. On the other hand, you should also note that science is ultimately a key element in the main critique of the film, so this is not a simple black and white issue. Anyway, this is a film that's very, very effective, I think, in the way that it sets up its narrative and, again, produces this kind of cognitively estranged look at things. And you can see certain scenes. Here's a particular scene from early in the film. When you get to it, you'll know what's going on here. But anyway, you can see it's kind of weird and eerie and creepy and ominous looking if you walk along and suddenly see these weird scarecrow type figures up on this hill. It suggests that maybe something very unpleasant is about to happen. In addition to imagery that furthers the narrative and atmosphere in this way, it also employs some very clever imagery. Here you can see the Council of Elders in the Ape Society displaying the old see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil mannerisms that are often associated with apes and monkeys. And finally, this is a film that includes some of the most iconic moments in American film. This shot here is the most iconic moment in the film. Again, in order to avoid spoilers, I'm not going to comment on this right now, but when you see the film, you'll know exactly what's going on in this particular moment. And you might already know, even if you haven't seen the film, because this is such a well-known moment.